one of the best things about this job for me is always the fact that I can talk to so many people here locally in our community, in my community. And one of the best people I have learned from over the last 2 years of helping out with the Splash Live as well as the MegaCast is our good friend Debbie Binder with the Clerk's office. The primary is just a few weeks away. And so I was bugging Debbie this morning because Debbie, I was having a brunch yesterday and I had so many friends over and we were talking about the primaries. And I was really surprised at how many people don't think the primaries are important. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's just as important as our main election. Do you get this question all the time as well?
You know, we do a little bit, but what we are noticing is the turnout is really low so far. We've sent out quite a few ballots, but we're not seeing as many back as we would like to. I don't think people understand the importance of the primary, because in a primary, you are determining who is going to go on that ballot that you vote in November. So it's really critical. If you want your voice heard as to who you're going to be voting for in the general, you need to be out there in the primary helping determine that outcome.
So can I ask you, Debbie, as well, because by this time we're technically 3 weeks out from the primary, but this year is a little bit different, right? We have the absentee ballot. So does that kind of help give you a gauge as to what the turnout's going to be when we come up to the August 2nd date?
Well, we have always had absentee voting. In 2018, with Proposal 3, it became no reason absentee voting. It was overwhelmingly approved by the voters. And that allows for anybody who wishes to vote by absentee to do so, where prior to Proposal 3, you needed to have a reason. So we have seen an increase in absentee voting as people exercise that right to vote by absentee. Those absentee ballots are every bit as valid as a vote that's cast in the precinct. So the answer is kind of yes, we can gauge a little bit more because we do see, that there has been an increasing turnout via absentee ballot. However, I think with the end of COVID, I think there may be more people that are going back to the polls. I for one, I like to vote in the polls. It's what I've always done. Not because I don't trust my absentee ballot. I completely trust that my absentee ballot would count. I just like the energy and I like to go get my sticker. Well, for the last few years, I have voted by absentee with COVID, and I was glad I had the opportunity to do so with, the Proposal 3. However, I will be one who's returning to the polls. So I think it's kind of hard to gauge right now how many people are going to go back to the polls. But what we're seeing as early indicators with the absentees is a lower number than I would have expected in terms of turnout.
And here's the thing that I think is great about the the primaries, rather, is that you can vote absentee. It takes so little effort on your part. So you don't have to wait until election day. Go ahead and get it in and make your voice heard. I'm really hoping that we can kind of spur this conversation to get people engaged. Mm-hmm. The other thing I heard, though, yesterday is a lot of people still don't understand the straight party ticket when it comes to the primaries. We've talked about it at length, and I want to say thank you because you've been my educator in all things election. And so I take all our conversations and I share them with so many other people. But despite that, so many people are so confused about the straight party voting during the primaries.
The best way to think about it is in a primary, you're voting to select you're voting to see who's going to represent the party, not to represent everybody. And that's an important way to think about it so that you know when you go to the general, you vote for whichever party you'd like. You vote for whichever candidate you'd like. But for the primary, you're selecting who's going to represent the party. So you're required to stay on one side of the ballot. If you do what we call crossover or split your ticket, it does void the partisan section of your ballot. Meaning, let's say you crossed over and you voided that partisan section. However, you had voted for the 2 proposals or 3 proposals, depending on which precinct you're in, those proposals would still count because those are nonpartisan. But your partisan section, you must stay on one side in a primary. Again, you're not voting for who's going to represent everybody. You're voting for who's going to represent the party. And that's a big distinction.
So a question that I got yesterday, and I really couldn't answer it. how does it work though to know whether or not you're voting within your party lines? Because, someone such as myself, I'm an independent. I typically vote across party lines, but then the conversation kind of went, well, if I'm a Republican, what prevents me from going into the primary, voting for who I think may be the worst person to represent or to run against my Republican candidate, to vote for that person on the party lines? Is that a valid question?
It's a very valid question, and Michigan does not require registration. So if they're open primaries, anybody can vote in whichever primary they wish. And that's something that, I wish I could tell you hasn't been done for years, but it has been done for years for people to go in and select the candidate they most want to be their opponent on their party. So yes, I think it's a valid concern. I think that one has to weigh out that you're going to also be compromising a vote for your party, for who you want to represent, but it is an individual choice by law and the fact that we have open primaries.
That's a good point, though. It's like, hey, if you're voting that way, then you're taking away from who you think is going to represent your party. With that, though, can I ask, because that's part of the election process, right? When I go in and I cast my vote, you don't know who I voted for. And we want that, right? Like, my vote is my vote. It doesn't need to be shared with the world.
Correct. Your vote is your vote. So in a presidential primary, in a presidential year, it's slightly different because you do have to request one ballot or the other. And so you are, choosing one party to vote in a presidential primary by ballot. It's not tracked, who you vote for and everything on that ballot. But there is, they do know, and it's not us. We have no idea who requests what ballot, but that is something that you do have to request. In a regular primary like we have this year, no one would know what party you voted for. You would just vote your party. The ballot is a secret ballot. Any identifier is detached before that ballot is tabulated. So your vote is 100% your vote. It is a secret ballot.
Debbie Binder with us this morning here on the Splash Live. It's always great talking to you. And Debbie, one thing about me, I'm kind of a document person, right? I don't want to use the word that we usually use with me, but I love when I can't sleep at night, I go through and I look at documents and online documents and searches and some world of freedom of information. So many more districts and entities are putting this information online. And one thing, though, we can find out is whether or not a person at least voted. I've been surprised in my years as reporting to find out how many people run for public office, but then they show that maybe they didn't vote for the last how many years. So that should be like at least something that's like your voice matters and people know whether or not you're using your voice.
And we do have that information in the sense that everything is available to the public. By being a municipality, you have what's called, you're bound to the Freedom of Information Act, meaning if people request information, we do have to share certain information. There is also information that is exempt from Freedom of Information Act. For example, on applications, we ask for people's email address and phone number. That is exempt from Freedom of Information Act. The reason we ask for that is if the voter forgets to sign their ballot, if the signature doesn't match, if there's a reason we need to get in touch with that voter to cure a deficiency in their ballot, we want to be able to reach them quickly. So having that phone number or email at hand allows us to do that. That information is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. But what we are all struggling with is that Freedom of Information Act does require us to release lists of voters with their addresses. So people will request that information. And what happens over time is one organization requests it, they share it with another organization, they merge it with a file that they have, they sell it, they share it. And so a lot of that information isn't up to date. And when you hear about people who get multiple contacts by third-party organizations, I had a call yesterday about, I got something from the Voter Information Center, I forgot the name of it, They're frequently legitimately trying to get out the vote, but it's not your local clerk's office. The only one that you're going to get from your local clerk's office is the red, white, and blue postcard, the fold over postcard. But people do get confused by the fact that they have these contacts. One sent out a voter report card, how you rank in comparison to your peers in terms of your attendance at the polls. It causes concern, especially I once had a woman that came to the window. She had just moved to Michigan to be near her kids and was chastised for her lack of voting in the previous years. She wasn't in Michigan. So it's important, Freedom of Information Act isn't going to change. So it's not going to allow us to not share that information. What becomes important is education of the voter so that they know what contacts are legitimately from your local clerk's office and which are from these third-party contacts. Some again are meant to just get out the vote or to help people engage in absentee voting. Some are meant to confuse. I did have a couple of years ago, my aunt received a text late at night at 11:30 telling her to see if she was registered. She followed the link and it showed that she wasn't registered and she hadn't moved in 25 years. She called me at 11:30 at night because she could. And I looked it up in the qualified voter file, the state's voter roll database, and she was just fine. So whoever sent that contact was simply trying to confuse her. So what matters, if there's any confusion at any time, somebody receives a piece of mail, someone receives a text message. Number one, we don't send any text messages, so I can promise you it's not from your West Bloomfield clerk's office. But if you receive something that is confusing to you, or call or come up here. Plenty do, and I can't stress enough that those are from third-party contacts that have just used lists they've been able to get by Freedom of Information Act, not information that we're sending.
I love that because we didn't even really kind of talk about that before. It's one of the things I just really, it's the primary confusion for so many people, but I love that we went on this subject and you clarified that for people as well. And I will say for anyone out there, putting in a FOIA, sometimes it's not so cheap. So I hope you're making a little bit of money off that. But Debbie, we always appreciate your time. You're so great and so knowledgeable.
Ronnie, I just want to clarify we don't make money on the FOIAs because we can only charge what it costs us in terms of staff to do. So it is not a profit center at all. It is literally to cover the expenses of having a staff member dedicated to producing that FOIA if there's a lot of information involved.
Well, thank you so much. And you know what, please extend my gratitude, not only to you, but also your entire staff over there, because I know this is a busy time for you, but we always appreciate your time and your education.
And Ronnie, will you just tell your viewers one more thing, that we are open by law, statutorily, we all have to be open certain hours the weekend before an election. We will be open at the clerk's office on Saturday, July 30th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. for absentee voting. So if those of you who can't get in because of work schedules and different things, we have those Saturday hours from 8 to 4 on the 30th. Please participate. Again, this is your opportunity to engage and participate in your democracy. And it's important, like you said at the beginning, have your voice heard.
I love it. I love voting. I get excited to get to vote. So thank you so much. And we'll compare our voter stickers after the election.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ronnie.